welcome. I'm Nathan Dewey, Director of the Redeemed, and today I'm so excited to have two guests with us as part of our relationship series in the month of February. We have Jeremy and Corrie Isaacs. Jeremy is pastor of Generations Church, and Corrie serves on the creative team there. Welcome, you guys.
Thank you so much. We're thrilled to be here.
Glad to have you. You guys just finished a book and released it in 2022. Your Marriage Matters. So super excited about that. Loved reading it. If our listeners are looking for a copy, where can they find a copy at?
Yeah, they can pick it up on Amazon. There's a couple of different options there for them and the different formats they want to use for to read it. But yeah, we're really thrilled about the book and the feedback thus far. It's been great. Awesome.
Well, we start almost every single one of our episodes with the same question, and I would love to just hear from both of you of what does redemption mean to you?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a sports guy, so I love to think in terms of something that was potentially lost or didn't meet expectations, and then they have that team or that player has a chance to kind of come back and redeem what was a lost season or a lost game or a lost opportunity, and come back and get redemption. And really kind of realize what their full potential was, maybe in the next game, the next season, that kind of thing. And so I love that thought for redemption and what it can mean for a team, a fan base, or an individual.
Yeah, I think redeemed is often looked at as like this new chance to do it right, to get it right. A little bit like furniture. You buy a really ugly piece of furniture, but you can somehow make it beautiful again. And put it in your home. And I know that can be a lot like restoration, but I think that that's a lot of redemptive things too, that you brought something old that didn't seem like it had any use or value and brought value to it. And that's how I feel like being redeemed is something that seemed lost, broken, lacked value, and God kind of steps in and adds value to it.
It's great.
Love that. Thank you guys so much for sharing. And it's always so interesting with each of our guests to hear their own take on redemption and how that relates to them personally. So thank you for sharing your own story. I'd love to hear more about how you guys met, a little bit of your own personal faith journey. The rumor is you guys met at a church camp. So I've got to hear a little bit more about your love story.
Yeah, we were at a church camp when we were both 13 years old. And the story that I tell is I was walking one way down the sidewalk and she was walking with a group of friends the other way down the sidewalk. And when we passed, I started walking her way down the sidewalk, and I kind of been chasing after her ever since.
Love it.
But yeah, met at a church camp at 13 and really just became friends from there. And we say best friends, but that relationship continued to develop through our teenage years. And we dated like a really short span when we were 16. So I was driving from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Knoxville, Tennessee. And then my family moved. We moved out of state, and then we reconnected when we were in college. And really, that you said faith too. That season of life, I never had the testimony of kind of running as hard as I could away from God necessarily, but I definitely ran away from the purpose on my life, the calling on my life. And it was in that college experience that a lot of things kind of came together in a really specific season, where the Lord kind of led me in the church I was attending, led us into this fasting season. And during that fasting season, the Lord really renewed a calling on my life. I was already kind of doing some things there, but also really kind of brought Corrie and the clarity of my relationship and the future that I had with Corrie into a clearer picture for me. And so all of that kind of overlapped and melded. I mean, obviously there's a ton more to that story, but I'm so thankful for that, because I believe our marriage and our relationship is built on a friendship. And so I love that.
Yeah, I agree. We'll date ourselves, but a little bit. But we used to do AOL Instant Messenger. Yeah. And so I remember coming into my house and like listening for it to dial up just to see if I happened to have a message or if we were on at the same time. So when you got mail really was our story a little bit. Yeah. So fun.
Yeah. So that was kind of the pieces. We really pursued a relationship with one another. And that looked like, whatever instant messaging was before text messaging and phone calls and all of that kind of stuff. But it looked like a lot of things. But I think the thing that we have loved is just pursuing relationship with one another.
Yeah.
Well, I love, Jeremy, how you shared that really that season where God began to work through your season of seeking him through fasting, and how your calling and also your relationship with Corrie kind of all came together at one time. I think that's so awesome, especially since you guys serve together in ministry. And that's so important that you're on the same page and have the same heart. What is it like for you serving as a lead pastor of a church and also having your wife on staff? And tell me a little bit more about that dynamic and what you're learning as a pastor and also leading your family through that.
Yeah, I think, Corrie and I, at least in our context, and I know this is not everyone's context in ministry specifically, but even before I was a lead pastor, I was a youth pastor, and we were serving together. I mean, again, more of that original story is that I was serving as at a church as a youth pastor while I was in college, and Corrie was helping as a youth leader. Like we had been friends forever, but it was like she came and helped serve alongside of me, and really God was doing in her a very similar work to what God was doing in me as it related to bringing our lives together. And so because of that, we've always done ministry together. It's probably not the most romantic picture, but I proposed to her in a youth service at the youth group that I was the youth pastor of, and I was preaching on 1 Corinthians 13, and I brought her up. I said, "Hey, I want Corrie to come up here and let me help use her as an illustration." And I talked about my love for her and proposed right there in front of our youth group, because I said to her, like, there's no better place for us to start our life together than in a ministry context, because we're going to do ministry together. And so we've always been a team. And so, serving as a lead pastor and having Corrie on the team, that's really just a formal arrangement of what was already organically happening, that she was thinking up the creative ideas in our youth group and for our youth ministry, and helping with sermon planning as I was trying to think about what to preach and teach, and then giving me some debriefs and affirmation and coaching and all of those things after services, like, this was great, and next time we could do this. And so it's really been an incredible partnership that I think is a beautiful picture, not just of the body of Christ that we read about, where everyone can help, kind of come together, but really this picture of Christ in the church and male and female coming together to really complement one another, and the gifts and talents. And, so much of what our ministry is because of the gifts that Corrie possesses. And sometimes she's saying them to me, and then I say them out loud, and I might get the credit for it. But ultimately, it came from a conversation driving in the car with Corrie or in a meeting. And so that's been a beautiful thing for us.
Corrie, how about for you? How is it? And do you feel the same way as far as Jeremy, or do you have a different take on it?
No, I really feel very honored that I get to work. I tell Jeremy all the time, he's my favorite human. And so any chance I get to be around him, so I count it a privilege that I get to be with him in the office and serve. And I think too, for me, I felt very called to ministry individually, and I wasn't sure exactly what that would look like. So I do think that helps, that it's not that I just have a job at the church, that I too felt called to ministry. And it wasn't an upfront position. I've never felt like that it was this upfront call necessarily. So to watch how God kind of orchestrated our lives and brought them together, and our gifts and our talents and our abilities to play off each other, I feel very fortunate. So, but I think it comes out of the fact that I too felt called to ministry too. And so then now it's an honor to not only serve the church, but get to serve Jeremy and our kids too. I know it's definitely about marriage, but our kids love the church and serve the church. Our son got out of school this morning. He's a senior, and the first place he came was here. And so I think all of us really do. My hope is that we all very much feel like it's a privilege to serve together and serve this place.
No, that's great. I think one of the things that I often probably discuss with my wife more than anything is just seeing so many couples that I don't really feel enjoy spending time together. When it really comes down to it. Right. And I love to see a couple, whether it's in ministry or in a different role, that they enjoy being together, that they're really good friends, that it's not just, hey, I'm married to this person, but I actually enjoy hanging out with this guy.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
And I know a lot of people, different temperaments and personality types and all of those things. There are definitely couples that, they do different things, or they have different hobbies, or they both work full-time jobs in different settings. And so that does take them apart. But what Corrie and I talk about even in the book a little bit is whether it's communication. My favorite show in the history of television is the show West Wing. I love politics and government and all of just watching all of that from afar. But one of those scenes, the guy says to the female character, he says, I just want to talk to you because I love the sound of your voice. And while that sounds like a great line of dialogue in a television show, like, yes, Corrie and I may have 9 million things to do today that are on different to-do lists and they take us apart. But if I have a choice, I want to spend time with Corrie. And like, if it comes down to it, and it's like, hey, I could hang out with Corrie, I could do something with Corrie, or I could go do something else, which I do on other times and other, like, I'm going to default to that because my preference is to spend time with her, make memories with her, have conversation with her. And so, it's not some kind of like unhealthy codependence. It's like a choice. Like we said we want to spend our lives together, and as much as possible, like, I love to do those things.
Oh, that's great. So you guys have already, I've mentioned, and you mentioned your book. How did that come about? How did you guys decide to write a book? I know that is a lot of work, and then especially a book on marriage. There's a lot out there. And so just trying to understand how you guys came to that decision, and then what was that like writing a book together?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then I'll let Corrie share. I just think for, over the years, because of some different ministry settings and the opportunity to be invited into speaking in conferences and some different marriage events, and then just events at our own church, we wanted to help invest in marriages. And so sometimes we would bring other speakers in. When our church was smaller, we couldn't really afford to do that necessarily. And so we would show videos, or we would teach just things we were learning, or things we were learning from other couples that we admired. And so some of the book came out of, like, over the course of time, we just said, at some point we probably need to take all of these thoughts and like put them into book form or collect them in some form. And about a year ago or so, we said, like, hey, let's do that. Let's actually write the book. And really in 2022, at the beginning of the year, we just decided, like, hey, we're going to do it. This is the year. We're going to work on it. And it started, honestly, we kind of had a head start. Just because we took some of these things that we've been teaching over the years and really began to lay those things out in what seemed like a natural order for us. And then we adapted that and then started to write new content of the things that we had learned since we taught those things or interviewed those types of couples or whatever. And so it really started out of things that we had been teaching, things we had been counseling other couples on for a number of years. And so that helped us to start with some format that we felt like would be helpful to other couples.
Yeah. Jeremy and I both come from very different pictures of what marriage is. And so I think our perspective, like, going into writing a book was really to say, like, regardless of what your context of marriage was, what picture you had growing up, like, God can help you tell a better story.
Yeah.
And it's this whole idea of, like, your marriage matters because you're telling a grander story to the world, what God intended marriage to be. And so regardless of what your picture is, if you kind of lean into how God created it, it can be this beautiful thing. And so, like, Jeremy's parents, they were married forever until his mom passed away. An incredible marriage. My mom was married multiple times. I had never met my biological dad. The dad that adopted me took his own life. Like, it was messy. But my mom kept me in church, and God captured my heart at an early age and then put these beautiful pictures of marriage in front of me. And although that wasn't what was like the example of my home, it became the example for my life to say, like, okay, God, you've captured my heart. If this is what it looks like, that's what I want one day. And then speaking of redemption in the way that only God could, he took kind of all of those broken pieces and redeemed the story so that, it feels like a coincidence, but no coincidence at all that I would be sitting here talking about marriage when it comes to the redemptive nature of God.
Yeah, that's great.
Corrie, that's so good. I think so many people think about marriage, and a lot of people honestly don't have a good example to look at, and often can feel a little bit hopeless. Or, how am I going to do this? I've never seen a great marriage. And so great advice and wisdom as far as looking at other couples who maybe do seem to have it together, pictures of our families in the church, of finding people that you want to emulate your marriage after. So such a great reminder for all of us, especially those who maybe didn't have the example that they wanted early on, that you can have a successful marriage. You can have a thriving marriage, even though you may not have seen that in your own home.
Well, and I think the thing that we talk about in the book, but really has been Corrie's story since I've known her, but especially within our marriage, is, there is this aspect at the end of the book of Joshua where he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Yeah. And so, the legacy that you're leaving to your children isn't really dependent on the legacy that was left for you. Like you do get
That's
to
right.
decide right now in
Yeah.
your life whether or not you're going to live the kind of God honoring life that will help to shape or inform the next generation, your kids or your nieces and nephews or the kids that you teach or coach or whatever. But you get to decide that for your life, and then we still have to decide. It doesn't matter what my context of marriage when I was growing up was. We still have to decide, and I have to decide what I'm going to invest in our marriage to help shape that story for our children. But then they have to decide. So there's a ton of this that is generational in that you can help to inform the next generation, commend God's works to the next generation that Scripture talks about. But every individual has to make those decisions, and so Corrie ultimately, and I'm not putting words in her mouth. She said it, she wrote it, but God helped to put people around her that modeled that for her. But then she comes into our marriage choosing every day to be committed to the constitution and the covenant of marriage and to really model that for our children. Again, our nieces and nephews, our future grandchildren, the children of our church, other married couples in our lives. Not that we have the perfect marriage, but actually showing the good, the bad, and the ugly and saying but this is what we signed up for. And in the end, it is telling the story of God's love through Jesus Christ for everyone that walks the face of the earth.
Jeremy, I couldn't agree more. Being somebody who has gone through divorce, sometimes you can feel like, oh, I lost my chance. I don't have the marriage that I wanted. And at the end of the day, I get to choose what kind of marriage I have today. And such a good reminder that it's a daily choice. And no matter what your heritage is in the past, or you get to set where you're going, the direction of your life and the direction of your marriage. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned in your book is the marriage triangle. I love if you would just explain a little bit about what the marriage triangle is and how important it is to have Christ as the focal point of your home.
Well, I think, if you imagine a triangle or the picture of a triangle, you have God at the top, you have a husband and a wife at the bottom of that triangle. And ultimately, if you kind of envision either or both parties from the bottom beginning to move toward God, what that naturally does is draws them closer to one another. The closer they get to God, the closer they are drawn to one another if both are in pursuit, of God themselves. And so I think that picture of a marriage triangle and really the philosophy or the thought behind it is that, we've all heard the stories. Maybe those that are listening right now, they're living in the kind of marriage right now where maybe they are in pursuit of God, or maybe neither of them is. And so they find themselves at a great distance from one another. But ultimately the picture is that as each of us individually, I can't make my spouse, no one can make the other person. But as we pursue God in our own lives and our partner begins to do that, we're drawn closer together. And so, I've said this a number of times in a number of different settings, but if I try to be the husband that Corrie needs apart from a relationship with God, it is going to be incomplete because God created her, He formed her, she's in relationship with Him. And so ultimately, as I'm drawn closer to the Lord, I'm able to understand through even the promptings of the Lord in my own life, how to better serve her, how to be a better husband, how to be a better father for my children. And so I just think for all of us, it really is about choosing to put God first in our lives and pursue Him, and then prayerfully hoping and believing and asking and having conversations with our spouse about them making that same commitment so that together we're in pursuit of the same God, the same relationship, and that draws us closer to one another.
No, that's great. I know for me, I heard that early on in my own journey, and that was one of the things that probably always stuck with me, partly because I could see it in my head,
Right.
the visual imagery of it. So I think it's so good to be able to think about that triangle and am I getting closer to God and am I getting closer to my spouse? Because those two work hand in hand oftentimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and marriage is a godly covenant, right? You stand at this altar and you commit yourself not only to each other, but to God. And I think in the world that we live in, we enter in marriages apart from God. But because it is a God ordained thing in this world, I mean, it would only make sense that as we get closer to God, we get closer to each other because it was His kind of established order a little bit.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I'd love to hear from you guys, just knowing your pursuit of God and how that's helped you guys draw closer together. What are some of the hurdles and challenges that you've faced in your own marriage, knowing that you guys have a senior in high school, you've been married for a little while? What are some of those that you look back and go, man, that was a big hurdle that we overcome or walked through?
Yeah, I think one of the earliest things that I think we had to wrestle with or work through, and I think every couple that we've been connected to had to do this in their own way. But Corrie mentioned like our different contexts of marriage growing up.
Yeah.
My parents really did have an incredible marriage. It wasn't perfect. And I think I wrote this in the book, but like I never heard them argue. I never heard them fight. Now, what I learned later when I grew up is they had a code word for it. And it says, hey, let's go discuss the budget. And they would go behind closed doors and like have conflict or an argument. I just thought they were really diligent with money. We never talked about the budget a lot, but I never heard them fight. And so when we got married, like we had our first argument, I thought, we're going to get a divorce. Like healthy couples don't fight. They don't argue. So there's got to be a problem in us if we're arguing, we're fighting, whatever. And so, Corrie, she was raised by a single mom with two other sisters. There were 4 women living in that house. They had arguments all the time. And so she had a better understanding of how to deal with conflict and really talk through things and to forgive, and that I just was lacking. And so early in our marriage, we had to learn how to work through conflict, and I don't know if this will be understood, but the way that I mean it, like to allow for some conflict, to recognize that like conflict is normal. There's 2 different human beings with different perspectives, different histories, trying to, work through some things together. And so allowing for that and working through and wrestling through it, that was something that I had to learn because I wasn't comfortable with conflict. I kind of avoided it at all costs. And so then that led me, especially early in our marriage, not to always tell the whole truth. It wasn't intentionally lying. It was trying to avoid conflict by withholding little bits of information that I thought would start a fight or I thought would frustrate Corrie. And so it really created a larger gap in our relationship because of the lack of full, transparent communication. And anytime over the history of our marriage that we've ever gotten kind of, a little bit further apart, I can usually trace it back to my inability to like fully lean in, be 100% honest, 100% transparent, even if it's not like sinful, hidden things. It's just a lack of full transparency and honesty with my wife because I'm trying to avoid conflict or I'm not sure how she'll take it or handle it. And so I've really had to learn through just trial and error and making a lot of mistakes, but ultimately getting a lot of grace and having a lot of conversations. And at the end of it going, no, okay, this is healthy. We're stronger. We've learned things about one another. So that in a nutshell, that's like one of the biggest pieces that have come up over and over in different seasons that started very, very quickly in our marriage. I think was one of the biggest ones for me.
Yeah. We obviously conflict is a big one. We've fought about the same things most people, or argued about the same things most people. Money, how to parent, what's the priorities in our life, schedule, busyness, like all the things that couples fight about or argue about. We've done it. I think for me though, in our relationship, it was how to fight fair. I grew up, you kind of gave the context on marriage. I was the middle child, but I had 2 sisters, my mom, we lived in a 2-bedroom house. We shared a bathroom. Like when you got really angry at the person, like you waited until they got in the shower. And I know it sounds so silly, but in the house we lived in, if you flushed the toilet, it like scalded the person in the shower. So we would like wait, people were really mad. We'd sneak in the bathroom. And so they would then scream and yell or whatever. But it really was kind of like every man for itself. And so it was this battle of who's going to win this argument. And you did that with these like low blows, And so I came into the marriage and I'm definitely not a fighter. My natural personality is this very laid back kind of peacemaker. But once I'm there, once I'm angry, they're all cards off the table. Yeah. And so Jeremy would often say like, I'd lose it and be arguing or whatever. And he was like, well, that's unfair what you said. That was personal. You're arguing, you're making it personal instead of making it about the problem or the issue. And so I really had to learn how to fight fair. Even the Bible says that like in your anger, do not sin. So it's not this avoidance of arguments or even being frustrated or angry, but the Bible is trying to tell us there is a correct way to handle it. And I always borderline, if not cross the line of sometimes sinful in how personal I made it, or trying to one up in the argument to prove a point, or waiting until I was too angry to have the conversation. And then it wasn't even about the actual problem. as much as it became this like unloading of things that probably 24 hours later wouldn't bother me, but in that moment they did.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was, we can always have discussions about all of the issues that would cause arguments, but it's just how to have those is what I had to learn.
I think the other thing that, just as it relates to like a hurdle, is Corrie mentioned earlier, my parents were married faithfully, just incredible, until my mom passed away. She passed away at 48 years old. She was very young when she had me. My mom and dad got married when she was 16 years old. And so then she had me and
Yeah, you are from Tennessee, right?
No, they were from North Carolina. I don't know if that makes it better, but yeah. So they, she was young, and she had me and my brother. My mom and dad had us when they were very young, and so we my mom used to say the phrase all the time, like, we grew up together, and so we were very close. But she got sick and then battled cancer for a little less than 2 years. And I lived about 10 hours away from where she lived. And so I wasn't able to like be there as much as I wanted to try to help her and help my dad. And so I was trying to, be like a sounding board for my dad, who was a caregiver. And then I was trying to be a sounding board for my mom, who was walking through this, because that had always been the role that I'd played in their lives, or her life specifically. And then at the same time, like, be honest with Corrie about what I was feeling. And we were, leading a growing ministry, and we had very young children. And I was in school. I was in my master's program, or my undergrad, and then my master's program. And so I think also, and this may sound, again, just kind of cliche, but like managing stress, but not just stress, but also then eventually grief, and being able to articulate that to my spouse, my partner, and then her knowing what it was that I needed. Like, sometimes it was to cry, sometimes it was to laugh, sometimes it was to talk, sometimes it was to be quiet because I was talking to everybody else about all these other things. And so I just think, again, it kind of comes all back to communication, but just learning how to communicate my needs without feeling like I was being needy. But there's some things going on physically, mentally, emotionally, and you can take that a lot of different directions. But I don't know that I actually know that I did it wrong for a huge chunk of that time period, because I don't know that I fully knew what to say. And especially as a guy, we most guys are naturally fixers, or they want to be the provider for their family. They want to be the strong guy, and to feel like if I was trying to articulate anything that felt weak, that felt emotional, it felt, I tended to bottle those things up until I had this panic attack one night. And I came in, it was nothing that we can even point back to that really triggered it. We were eating dinner in our living room on TV trays, watching TV with our kids. And I needed a fork, and I walked back into the kitchen. I grabbed my fork, and as I'm walking back to the living room, my whole body felt like it was shutting down. I thought I was having a heart attack. And I kind of collapsed onto the couch, and I started crying, and I cried for a couple hours. And I couldn't talk. I mean, I couldn't even say what there was anything to say. And so Corrie called a family member who was in the medical field, and they said, "Hey, get him a banana, get him some Powerade, and let him cry," and then allow him to talk it out. And so we kind of did that. But my body eventually revolted of all the things that I was bottling up because I couldn't communicate those. So again, probably a long answer, but I think a part of a big hurdle for both of us, but especially for me, was learning how to communicate my emotional needs and my emotional hurt to Corrie without feeling like that made me weak or didn't actually make me the husband she needed me to be.
No, thank you guys for sharing and being open about your own hurdles that you have overcome. I know we all have them because marriage is not easy. It is challenging because it is two people that are very different and different backgrounds, different personalities, but it's also very beautiful. Because in that diversity and in our different stories, we become better by, and really it's a picture also the church, like just relationships in general. The more we're around people that can challenge us, that can encourage us, that have different backgrounds, we learn so much just by the different relationships we have in our life. And one of the things you mentioned, talking about the hurdle is how you dealt with conflict. In your book, you talk about not fighting over things that are unimportant, not wasting your time on arguments that are silly. I want to know, how do you put that into practice? Knowing that as a busy couple with 4 kids, you have a lot going on in your life. There are those stresses that come about. There are those days that you're both tired. So how do you navigate to make sure that when those things come up, that tension rise, that you don't waste time on those and you choose to not get involved in an argument over something that's probably not very important?
Woo. Well, it's easier said than done, right? Probably easier to write than to
Exactly.
practice. No, I think it requires you kind of to take a beat when you're upset, when you're frustrated. And as cliche as it sounds, take a deep breath, zoom out a little bit and think, if I wasn't exhausted, if I wasn't overwhelmed, what would this bother me? Is this like something spiritual, character traits that is a big deal? Or is this something that like I'm tired, or the kids have worn me out, or we feel pulled in 10 directions and we haven't spoken in 10 days and it feels like I'm living with a stranger? Like I think proper perspective, and I know that sounds super basic, but that's really where we find ourselves, is trying to like zoom out a little bit in the moment instead of reacting in the heat of the moment, I think has been a big deal for us. But I also think that there's something super special about like wisdom and age. You just don't have the energy to fight about dumb stuff anymore. It's like we used to, and now it's like it's not even worth the energy. Like I'm already exhausted. This is going to take a lot of work. It's not worth it. Like I'm done. It will be fine in the morning. Just go to sleep.
Yeah. Well, and two, one of the things she said right there is like, I do think, and I used this phrase earlier, but like a little bit of trial and error, like a little bit of learning about yourself. Like what are those things that, I overreacted to, and a day later, a month later, a year later, like I don't even remember what that argument was about, but I remember my kind of overly emotional reaction or quick reaction, and learning, does that happen when I'm tired? Does it happen when I'm busy? Does it happen when I'm hungry? Does it happen, those kinds of things? And the more you learn that about yourself and you learn those triggers about your partner, it really helps you to know, like, this is not a good time to have this conversation, but it doesn't mean we're going to avoid the conversation. We're just going to move it to a different setting or a different time on the calendar or whatever that is. And so learning that about yourself, but also learning, when does your spouse receive information? Or that helps, I think, to have healthier conflict, healthier conversations, because it's in a better setting where you can actually work through some things together, or determine, once you've taken a 30-minute break, or we're going to wait and talk about it in the car, you get to the car and you go, you know what? I was frustrated. I'm sorry. It was stupid. I wasn't that mad. It was just in the moment,
Yeah. Jeremy, I love that you talk about, basically agreeing to talk about it at another point. One of the things I think I had misunderstanding or didn't fully understand what scripture meant about not going to bed angry. Because I think sometimes you can agree to not be angry, but not talk about maybe what that topic is, because you're not in the best mindset. You're exhausted from your day. I mean, the last thing you need to do after you've spent all day running and you get home at 11 is to talk about the budget.
That's right.
And, you probably need to agree, hey, we're going to be okay. We're going to be on the same page and move this conversation to a later date. And that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It would be wrong if you didn't deal with it and continue to allow it to fester in your marriage. But sometimes you just have to agree to, let's wait and talk about this when we're both in a better place. So definitely love that you brought that out, because I think I'm so thankful myself that I learned that wasn't bad to schedule something for later, because you can be tired. I know you guys definitely experience that with the life that you have going on now. Tell me, with 4 kids, how do you do that? I know there's different ball games and church activities. What have you learned in prioritizing your marriage with all that you have going on and leading a church, and caring, for all that's, just laundry? I mean, last weekend I was working on, I was like, man, it's amazing how kids can go through clothes, and it just adds up. And how do you prioritize your marriage with all that you have taking place in your life?
I think nothing unintentionally gets better. Like anything that gets better is because you work on it, you prioritize it. I mean, you use that phrase a couple of times about prioritizing. And so I think for Corrie and I, we decided early on that we were going to just be intentional. And that looks a lot different in different stages and different seasons. So when the kids were really young, like that probably was very simply just, 30 minutes or watching a show right before we went to bed, but after the kids did, or, sitting in the kitchen together and eating for a few minutes before we went somewhere. just being very intentional about a few minutes together in the midst of the chaos because of the season we live in. Once our kids all were in school, so when our youngest, which is our daughter, we have 3 older boys and the youngest is the little girl. Once she got into kindergarten, my off day at the church was Friday. And so we just started what we called Friday. And again, that can look like a lot of different things. It doesn't imply, we were telling some friends about this several years ago, and like the first Friday they went on a Friday, he called me, he was like, how do you afford this? We've gone to Target, and she got her nails done, gone to a dinner, and he was like, I'm going to go broke. And I was like, no. Some Fridays, it's driving in the car. It's free. Some Fridays, it's $1 movie theater rather than a full price movie theater or a matinee, or it's Chick-fil-A versus going to like a big restaurant. Or so it can look like a lot of different things. But we just decided like we're going to spend time together. Some Fridays it's at the house. We don't leave the house, but we're together. We're watching a movie or we're doing some project together. But we did just decide we're going to prioritize time together every week. And then we also try to prioritize some time away together every year. Now, again, different seasons, different budgets, all those different things. Sometimes that was an overnight trip locally, a hotel in the same town. Sometimes that was like a 3-day cruise that we found on the 90-day ticker on vacations to go. It's like, if my dates are flexible, I'm finding the cheapest cruise, two or 3 nights. But we really tried to be very intentional to get away together so that Pastor Mark Batterson says change of place plus a change of pace equals a change of perspective. And it's amazing how those 2 or 3 days or those 48 hours, 72 hours a week together away from the routine and schedule actually allows us to re-enter kind of the chaos of life or the business of life or the schedule of life and be in a healthier place, a healthier marriage, to be able to kind of manage and really be the healthiest version of ourselves for our children, for our church, for our friends. And so I think that is just something we've prioritized. We've tried to prioritize it, not just on our calendar, but in our checkbook and all of those kinds of things to make sure it is something that doesn't just get washed away in the midst of everything else on the calendar. So I think for me, that's the biggest deal, is just prioritizing and choosing to make an intentional effort.
Yeah. You said we have 4 kids. Each of them are involved in high-level sports, travel ball, church. I mean, all the things. And so, like, I got in the car the other day and sat down beside Jeremy, and I was like, hey, I'm Corrie. I think we share this house together. We have these kids that are running around. I think we're supposed, like, life gets busy, and there's definitely times that it's like you feel a little bit like roommates and passing, taking one kid one place, running one to the other or whatever. But I think it comes back to even what you said at the beginning, like friendship in your marriage is important. And just like, even if I'm in the car and we've been going 1,000 directions, he's who I'm talking to as I go from one spot to the other. Or he makes sure to have an intentional conversation that night. Jeremy's much more of a quality time kind of guy. Like, he likes the Fridays. It feels very like intentional. I'm really more quantity. So I don't care if it's utter chaos in the kitchen. If we're all together, that's joy to me. So like, I think finding out each of your rhythm and really trying to give to each other the way they kind of receive love and how they feel valuable or whatever. And so for me, it's just, I mean, if we're in the kitchen and I'm cooking dinner and he's just sitting on the stool talking to me, that feels like we're together, even though kids are running in and out, but we're talking about our day, and that feels like a connection to me.
So you guys talk about the things you do to prioritize your marriage. What are some of if you were to look back over your marriage, what is one of your favorite things about your marriage?
Ooh,
Wow, that's a good question.
that's a great question.
I think, man, I'm serious. My brain went 14 ways all at the same time. It just caused it to like reboot. And I don't want it to be redundant for what we just said, because we were just talking about it. So I don't want it to just be like the recency bias that we're just talking about. But I think that there have been these things, whether it is from 13 years old, youth camp, or college funny things, or, when we first got married, or trips that we took, or family trips that we took. But I love that Corrie and I have like inside jokes. Like, I love that there are things we can look at one another. We did this just the other day, and like something was happening in the room, and I could look at her with a certain look. She looks at me with a certain, and I know what she's thinking about what's happening around us, because we've talked about it. There are these little kind of, I say inside jokes, but just kind of insider language. And so I think if you're just talking about like my favorite thing about our marriage, it's like that we've made a ton of fun memories together and but it's really created a whole vocabulary that's kind of like just our own. And I love that. I love the idea that we get to share in that. And again, it just takes a look, and I know kind of what she's thinking or where she's going, and what that means to her. And so I think for me, that's one of my favorite things about our marriage.
Yeah, Jeremy's an incredible trip planner. I don't love surprises, but he loves to surprise me, And so, incredible trip planner. It's going to sound super cheesy, but my brother-in-law says, who doesn't love a little cheese?
Yeah.
But for me, I think my favorite thing is just who Jeremy is. I mean, it's really something sweet to be married 19 years and you still love the person. And not only love them, I tell my kids all the time, even when they were little, I really love you, but I like you too. I like who you are. And for me, I know it's cheesy. I know it even sounds like a rom-com. I don't mean it to, but like, I love Jeremy. I love who he is, but I really like him too. And I think the special part about marriage is, yes, there are all of these arguments, and there are the days that I annoy him and he annoys me, or we're frustrated, or we haven't talked as much, or we haven't. But if I take a minute, and even I don't even have to remind myself of who he was and why I fell in love, but if I just kind of zoom out of the chaos of the day or the chaos of the week or the chaos of the moment, it doesn't take me long to go like, man, not only do I love him, I really like who he is. And to be 19 years into marriage and still go like, man, I just like who he is. That feels like the most special part to me.
Well, that's really sweet.
It's true.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing that. Jeremy, you mentioned, just the fun that you guys have. So when's if you guys think back, the last time that you had a really, maybe you were to tears, with laughter or belly laughed, can you think back to a moment that's just like most recent that happened?
Yeah. So, mine centers around our kids. Like, we laugh at our kids a lot. And laugh with our kids a lot. Maybe saying,
oh, they're great entertainment, aren't they?
They are great entertainment. They're kind of ready-made right there in your house. But we have the 3 older boys. So our oldest son's a senior, our second son's a sophomore, and then our third son is an 8th grader. And he's never met a stranger. He's hilarious. He's fun. He's a great friend. But he's he's really smart in school. He makes fantastic grades. But he's also like a little absent-minded, and I mean that like he just sometimes he just misses a beat, he misses a step, And so the other night, this is a while back, we were in the living room and we were talking to our oldest son about some things that he had coming up, both school things, church things. He plays baseball, and so we were talking about some practices, and so he was talking about the fact that we had put those on our shared calendar. We have like a shared family calendar, and so it was on there. And so Tucker, who's our third son, he was just sitting there and he was listening to the conversation, and he was actually holding his little phone, and he was like, wait a minute. And he said to our oldest son, he was like, wait a minute, you have stuff on your calendar? And Cooper was like, yeah. He was like, I've got school stuff and church stuff and sports stuff. And Tucker said, wow. He's like, I don't have anything on my calendar except Hanukkah. And what he was referring to was like the auto-populated holiday calendar that Apple puts on there. And so he said, like, every now and then he just scrolls through there to see when the next holiday is and what's coming up. There's nothing on his calendar as an 8th grader, which he actually does. He has a ton of things going on. But we got so tickled at him just thinking about, I think, how busy our lives are with these kids. And Tucker just kind of floating through it. It's like, go get in the car. That's the first time he thought about leaving the house, even though we've been planning for it all day. So I think for me, again, it's kind of more kids than family than marriage. But I mean, I'm serious. When I laughed about it for like 3 or 4 days thinking about Tucker. No, I got nothing but Hanukkah on my calendar. So.
Jeremy's definitely the storyteller of the bunch. And so I don't know how this will translate. But in the moment, I laughed until I couldn't breathe. We were upstairs in Jeremy's office the other day, and some of the staff members hadn't been feeling well. So I'd been working in my office. I'd stepped into Jeremy's office, and a pastor friend of his had sent him a message, knew some of the staff members were sick, and had sent him a message and said, how are you feeling? And Jeremy, not trying to be funny, not trying to, was dead serious, said, I feel really good, but I have sneezed a couple of times today. And I looked at him and I was like, you cannot say that. You've got to delete that right. I sneezed a couple of times today. We were like, what? Yes, you feel fine. But like he associated sneezing with getting sick, or I don't know. It
No,
just caught me so
I was
caught off
trying to tell them that I was, I wasn't sick, but I mean, maybe something was coming on. I don't know. I mean, I was sneezing more than
I
normal.
wake up and sneeze a couple of times. I was like, you cannot say that. Delete that right now. That sounds ridiculous. And it was so stereotypical, like what you think of, like man cold and all the things, and it fit right in. I was like, you cannot say that. But in the moment, retelling it, I'm sure isn't quite as funny. But in the moment, I laughed so hard, and so then he deletes it, and he laughs hard.
I was very offended because I'm thinking I was trying to say I'm healthy. I just may have something coming on. I don't know.
We were so tickled. Several people from the office came in to find out what was going on, so we laughed really hard at that one, or I laughed really hard at that one too.
That's all right. It was all right.
Well, you can definitely tell that you guys are great friends, and I love seeing that. I love seeing the marriage that you have. Not only have you written to encourage and challenge other people, but you model it. And thank you guys for modeling that. You guys know, primary audience is men. So I'd love to just kind of this, as we wrap things up, anything that you feel like, a word to the guys in our audience about marriage or relationships. Maybe it's a young guy who's, engaged and what's coming ahead for his marriage. Any last words you'd share with our audience? And then we'll take some fun questions to wrap things up.
I'll let you go first.
Oh, so to the guys, I would say that to pay attention. And I know that I don't even mean that condescending. I think like we're taught that like it's the flowers, it's the expensive things, but for the most part, it's just paying attention to each other. It's noticing when they're frustrated. It's noticing when they're tired. It's noticing when they're overwhelmed. It's paying attention when they're speaking to make them feel like you're listening to them. It's just all the things, and all of it is just about attention given, and that's free. And so I know guys don't love to spend money like girls like to spend money most of the time, but attention is free. And I think if we give that, I think that is a game changer in our marriages.
Yeah. I think for
Corrie,
go ahead. You said it. Go ahead.
No, Corrie, that's great. Cause I think, so true. One of the things that's really been helpful for me is to understand that I should study my wife more than anything else I study. And if I study her and know the things that bring her joy, the things that bring her pain, then I'm going to be successful because, it is, women are more complicated than we are as guys. And so it's an awesome opportunity as guys, we can see it as a challenge and a great honor that we have to really learn our spouse. So thank you so much for bringing that out. Sorry, Jeremy, I had to just, that's one of those things that just resonates so well with me.
I'll let the guys off the hook a little bit. You said girls are more complicated. And the funny thing is we don't really understand ourselves most of the time. And so we are complicated. And so there's no way for you to understand us either because we don't understand ourselves. So give yourself some grace too. We're figuring it out.
That's great. I think for me, I'll go a little more spiritual, but it really comes out of the heart of the book that we wrote. But really what I strive to do, I missed the mark a ton more, but this idea that your marriage matters is really founded out of the book of Ephesians, where it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And then it talks to the wives, but just for a second, just as a husband, as a man, when I read that, I don't read that as, oh, I'm the head and she should bow down and submit. Like there's parts of scripture that you can start to unpack and really understand different facets of the relationship. But before I try to instill anything else in anybody else, I have to evaluate myself through the lens of, am I loving my wife the way that Christ loved the church? Even in my imperfection and humanity, my sinful nature and flesh nature, like, am I striving to love my wife as Christ loved the church? And what he did is he gave himself up for her. And so that means that like there are things that I might need to give up so that I can be the man that I'm supposed to be, the husband that I'm supposed to be. So often, men kind of, they view masculinity and being a man as these certain things. And I'm not just talking about those cliche things, but I think if you just filter it through, like, am I being the type of man that God, the Father, asks me to live out and to be to my wife, to my children, which is modeled in his son, Jesus Christ, like then we got a lifetime to continue to try to, you know, chase after that picture of what it means to be a husband and a father and just a man living on this earth. And so I would say, guys, like, you're never going to arrive at that, but we constantly pursue it by just continuing to evaluate our heart in light of Jesus Christ and saying, God, whatever those things are in me that do not reflect you and your character and your nature, like, let's just rid me of those things and replace those things in me that are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If I am controlled by the Spirit of God, led by the Spirit of God, I'm going to be a better husband. I'm going to be a better man. I'm going to be a better father. I'm going to be a better friend. I'm going to be a better pastor. And if I try to do those things on my own, I'm actually being led by my flesh, my desires, my will, you know, my preferences, you know, whatever those things are. And so I just think like a constant daily pursuit of a growing relationship with God. This is God constantly mold and shape me into what you need me to be, to love her well and to love the people around me well. I think if we do that, man, it's a lifelong journey, but there's so much fulfillment in going, man, I feel like today I served my wife in a way that was God honoring. It's a challenge, but it gives you something to pursue and chase after that's different than what culture's telling you.
Thank you for bringing it back to God's word. So beautiful. The marriage is such a picture of God's love for us, and we get to model the gospel for those who are married, and just, it can really be a megaphone of the goodness of God. So thank you for bringing it back to God's word. Last thing I'd love to do, we sometimes do a rapid fire of questions. So what I'd like to do is, if you guys will, you're kind of choosing which one you like the most. And if you'll both say your answer at the same time so that we can see if you guys are in full agreement on these, or if you have a different opinion.
No.
So
Okay.
the first one I'm going to throw out there is just for you, Jeremy, really. So, you know, Corrie, you can definitely share your opinion, but I heard you are a UNC fan. So LeBron or Jordan?
Oh, Jordan. That's not even close. That's not even close. You can answer if you want to.
I knew it was going to be Jordan.
I mean, that's not even close.
I did that too for you and for my wife. She loves when somebody says LeBron. She's like, no, don't even go there.
That's ridiculous.
So,
I don't understand.
Late night, early morning.
Late night.
Early morning.
So,
Not
Corrie,
even
I
close.
heard you like to start projects around 11 o'clock. Is that true?
From 11 or 12, I get my second wind. I'm ready to paint the basement.
Yeah.
Jeremy's ready to not paint the basement.
I feel you. I'm a late night person as well. Mexican food or Italian?
Italian.
Mexican.
He's Mexican.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
Introvert.
Date night in or date night out?
Date night out.
I'm in.
Love it. Thank you guys so much for humoring me with those questions at the end. Thank you for sharing your story, being vulnerable. And I really do hope our audience will go check out your book. Great resource to have in their hand. Thank you for writing that. Thank you for being honest and sharing your story with each of us today. And it's just a pleasure. Thanks again for just modeling it, not only talking about it, but modeling it with your lives and being able to see that and even how you interact with each other.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much.